Welcome to our second video in the series of standards revision videos. Today, Rebecca and I are going to focus on the organization and structure of the standards, which will help provide you an introduction and a better understanding of how the standards are laid out. Now, video 1 contained information about the revision process, but we are going to actually get into the standards and look at them. Our learning goal for today is we want to build a shared understanding of the organization and the architect of the standards, because we truly believe that they are very good and very helpful for our teachers.
And really, Carol, teachers need to remember to stay in that document. The intent is for you to, use that document. Don't take the standards outside and try to use them in isolation. Use them in the document with the literacy practices.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's a very good statement. I want to bring you back and help you understand what the vision is, because Rebecca and I both will refer back to what the writer's vision was for certain things that you'll find in the standards and how they actually occurred. First of all, the reading writing standards were created by educators for educators, because we want all students to be prepared and have a productive life, bottom line. So the architecture should be useful and practical for teachers, and I think that you will see as we go through this, the goal, their vision, truly come into play. I've actually done about close to 10 trainings in working with teachers, and that's one of the voices I hear most often is, these are so much better. They're so much more practical. They are. It's the intent of the standard is clear. And that brings us to that the standard should be clear and directive, but not prescriptive, because the standards are your what. But you, the teacher, makes the decision, just like a doctor gives us a prescription for an ailment. You prescribe the instructional strategies and practices and things that will help kids achieve the goal. The standard should consolidate redundancies and reflect the current state of evidence-based research and align the incremental expectations among grade levels. So we hope the information that we're getting ready to share with you in this video will help you understand and have a better knowledge of the actual document itself. So let's begin by looking at the organization of the standards. As you can see on the screen, we have 6 strands. And 4 of the strands that you're seeing are very familiar to those who have taught previously. We're looking at reading foundational skills, reading literature, reading information, and language. But we also have 2 new strands added: handwriting skills and composition. Now, we will talk a little bit later and really get into each of these, especially those that are new, which are the handwriting skills and the change from writing to composition. And the composition, the writing committees chose to include a composition strand rather than a writing strand, because they envision composing as more than the traditional use of paper and pencil or word processing. One of the ways that I have encapsulated this into my mind is we're composing written responses, and the written response may be as long as an essay, it may be as short as answering a short answer question. So we are composing thoughtful writing within the three modes that we always know that we'll talk about in a little bit.
And Carol, also something to note there is, yes, you compose a written response, but that response sometimes will take a digital form. And so the committee wanted to help teachers and students to kind of embrace the technology age or the digital age that we live in. And of course, when you think about rhetoric and composition, a text can be print or non-print. And so we want them to understand the full impact of communication and how that works in terms of composition.
Thank you, Rebecca. That is very true. Now let's look a little bit deeper at the 6 strands and the intent, and as we were talking, the writer's visions. The Strand Standards outline what a student should know and be able to do independently by the end of each grade level in K through 8 and each grade band for 9-10. And these grade level specific and grade banded standards intentionally support the learning progression. And I'm going to stop right there. Intentionally support the learning progression. If one grade level leaves out an important step in the learning process, then the student has missed out on the intent for the support for the learning progression. As they strategically stair-step students toward a guiding principle for each standard. Now you're getting your first glimpse at a new term found in the standards, guiding principle. And we will discuss that later on, but I do want to point out to you right now, prior, in the previous standards, those were called the anchor standard. Mm-hmm. So the intent has never changed, even though we've changed the language to guiding principle. This is what we want kids to know and be able to do by the time they leave our high schools. Now, one of the things that we have the opportunity to do in our trainings is allow teachers time to get into the actual standards document. The first 20 pages of that document is awesome. It contains information that clarifies for teachers, principals, district office, what the intent at each of the 3 grade band levels are. So what we're able to do, and I want to encourage you to take the time to do this, whether it be independently or whether with your grade level or in a faculty meeting, however works best for you, but to actually get in and look at this one-page document. The overview pages for K5 found on page 20, 6-8, page 222, and 9-12, 319. I do want to remind you that the actual document is over 400 pages long, so I don't think very many people will want to print, especially classroom teachers want to print the entire document. In fact, we've had the opportunity at KVEC, those who have attended our sessions, to give them a bound copy of just these first 20 pages in the document, the actual standards for their particular grade level, along with the interdisciplinary literacy practices, which we'll discuss later. But what we asked our folks to do was to read through your specific grade band overview and do this: underline, highlight, circle, whatever works best for you, but we want you to focus on the information there that will impact your instruction. It's a strong piece of the standards that kind of encapsulates it all and puts it together, so that when you start breaking it down by standards and by specific grade levels, you have a better understanding as an educator of the intent of the whole process. So what I'm able to do, Rebecca and I are able to do now, is to pull out a few of the commonalities that are actually in each of the grade band overviews. So for example, all of them mention, and all of them are very intent about that we want kids to be able to read widely and deeply from a broad range of high quality, increasingly challenging literary and informational print and non-print texts, and text sets from diverse cultures, time periods, and disciplines, which include all content areas. Now, one of the things that I think it gives itself to the opportunity for our teachers, as Kim Surgeon, who is the social studies specialist here at KVEC, as we've been able to do a lot of work together, is the use of social studies texts to teach kids how to read. And we have been looking closely at that research and been sharing some of that information within our trainings so that we know that the text with the content actually will increase reading ability in students. And I follow Timothy Shanahan and Doug Fisher and Nancy Fry, who do a lot of work in that area, and their research is proving that to be true. Students will learn to activate schema, use cognitive strategies flexibly to acquire rich content knowledge. Now, one of the things about the standards that some of our teachers wanted more clarification on had to do with schema. And those who teach K-5 understand schema, and it's a part of your daily instruction. What occurred, though, at middle and high is that teachers kind of move away from that. And in a nutshell, schema is activating your prior knowledge. And we will tell students a lot of times, think back to what you did in Miss So-and-so's class, or think back to when you studied. But sometimes we have to have intentional instruction that leads them back to that in order to build the new content knowledge that you're trying to teach.
And I think, too, in the new standards, the part of what the intent is for students to be self-aware that you have schema, that you can draw on your prior knowledge when you find yourself in a new learning situation, and to help students to be cognizant of that in your instruction. So it's not just that you help them activate the prior knowledge, but that you make them aware that that's what you're doing.
Very good. When we're talking about the development of reading closely, all three levels, when we're talking about K-5, we're talking about develop the habit of reading closely, and the best way to do that is using teacher or student-generated text-dependent questions. We have to scaffold that learning too. Sometimes you give them a text-dependent question and you tell them what paragraph it's in, just to prove to students, yes, it's there. But of course, your questions will get more difficult. You'll pull away telling them exactly. But allowing kids to read something and then reread it using text-dependent questions and collaborating with their peers to dig those out. Now, as you can see, at 6-8 and 9-12, it's still considered you must continue to develop the habit of reading closely.
And that's something that sometimes when you're at the 11-12 band, students are a little resistant to. But I still have students, when I give them a novel, I may give them 2 chapters to read in class today. And in the last 10 or 12 minutes of class, I will give them 4 or 5 text-dependent questions from what they were supposed to read and have them go back, reread, find those answers, because that's something that you have to practice. And the more you read, the better you read. And that's just the way it is.
That's exactly right. And the next commonality in the grade band overviews has to do with Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary. We want teachers to absolutely, Lexile is a great place to start. Flesch Kincaid, there's many, many ways to get those quantitative measures in identifying grade level appropriate text, but we have to include the qualitative measures too, which includes the Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary in context, not just teaching the vocabulary separately, but in context, and subject knowledge requirements too. And one of the important pieces of this is, we can't separate reading and writing. In order to write about what they've learned, they have to have read, as you just said. The more they read, the better they read. Now, I'm always asked, do you have any list? And when things are posted, I will be able to share with you, or you can email me at any time, some of my favorite. There's everything on the internet you can imagine for Tier 2 and 3 vocabulary. But my favorite document that you could Google, his name, Robert Marzano, has created a document by grade level, by content area, of all Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary that is beneficial for students. So don't hesitate to drop me an email if you want that, or I can give you access. You will have access to it later once we have it posted on the Holler. The next piece in looking at the 3 grade band overview commonalities is in the composition area. And it's the standards at all 3 grade level, or all 3 grade bands, explicitly state this. Emphasis should be placed on text-based and evidence-based writing experience. And even goes into what, in looking at research, the text-based writing greatly benefits reading comprehension by encouraging students to review and reflect on what they read, just as we said in the reading a minute ago, with close reading, with text-dependent questions, and higher level vocabulary.
And Carol, really, it's not fair to students to give them something to write about, something that they may or may not have prior knowledge of. But if you give students a text and they read that text, and maybe they read 2 or 3 texts on the same topic, and then you ask them to write about it, even your struggling students will have something to say. And that's, writing is thinking made visible. You have to give them something to think about first.
I love it when you say that. Writing is thinking made visible. And that leads us into another thing that the overviews strongly point out, and some discussions that I've been having and questions I've been being asked in my role as the literacy instructional specialist for KVEC. Reading and writing should be viewed as complementary learning rather than as separate subjects.
Amen.
And some administrators at both the district level and the building level have talked with me about the fact that, especially in the elementary school, that they have a reading teacher and then they have a separate writing teacher. Well, our standards, just the tone of the standards, do not advocate that. However, it can be done if those 2 teachers collaborate daily, maybe even as co-teachers, understanding that one is, for example, that if you're reading in reading class, you're reading an informational explanatory type text. In other words, informational text. But the next period they go to the writing class and they are reading a narrative type text. So that causes lots of confusion for kids when they go to the reading class, reading informational text, go to the writing, and they're going, especially in the lower elementary, they're doing narrative type writing. So as long as the teachers work together, the reading writing connection can stay connected. When we look at language, the language strand specifically says K5 demonstrate command of standard English grammar. And as in working with K-5, you are definitely, especially with, I think about our K-3 teachers, your standard your command of standard English grammar usage, and especially the mechanics. Yes, they're very simple, but they are so important. They are so important. 6-8, we move from demonstrating command to demonstrating control. And as a former middle school teacher, when you start taking commas away from middle school students, they certainly don't like that. So when we look at 9-12, we come in to demonstrate firm control. So the bottom line is, you're seeing right here on this particular, the language strand, you're seeing evidence of where the writers make sure that we are scaffolding, that the whole K-12, this is the expectation. So not looking at those pages, it's kind of doing a disservice to yourself, the pages 1 through 20 in the actual standards document, to give you that overall look.
Carol, can I say one thing
You sure
here?
can.
Here's a thought from a 11th grade grammar teacher. The scaffolding that goes on with the language standards is so important. And one thing that I think that sometimes we don't do or haven't done in the past is to make that connection clear for students, that grammar builds, and that those basic skills of learning the parts of speech, everything else that you teach students in grammar basically depends on them understanding the 8 parts of speech, their definition and their function, and that's crucial. And so even in those early grades, making sure that students have that firm foundation. And then I think that the other place where we sometimes fall down is we don't hold students accountable for knowing those things that we know for sure they were taught last year, but we back up and start over again. And I think that, and this goes to the opportunity myth as well, if you hold them accountable for what they're supposed to know and support them in applying it to continue building their skills, I think that we would see more success over time.
I agree. The next point in the language standards strand refers to, as you can see underlined there, the use of the interdisciplinary literacy practices to develop skills in a logical progression to demonstrate competency for reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And this is the first time we have brought up the word speaking and listening, and I'm sure you've noticed that that strand is no longer there. It's embedded within the others, the reading and writing standards, and really always have been. And it was one of those things that, looking at redundancies and how we can make it better. But as far as the interdisciplinary literacy practices, we will go into more in-depth about those practices and where they fit in the standards as we move to this next slide. Now, this is where we're actually getting into the views of the standards. The standards actually have 3 views. What you're seeing on the screen is called the grade level view. And those of you who are experienced teachers and have used the Common Core standards, the notations, the strands and coding have remained the same. When we're talking about the strand name and grade level at the top, the strand categories have not changed, the coding has not changed, and then the standard on this page, it being in the middle. Now this is, what you're looking at right here has standards 1 through 10 for 5th grade on one page. What you're seeing that is absolutely new are the 10 interdisciplinary practices on the right side that we just alluded to in the previous slide. Now, When we are looking at these 10 literacy practices, they are located on every page of a grade level standards. And it's there to me as a reminder, these are the practices, literacy practices, not necessarily strategies, because again, teachers are the prescribers. They choose the way to make this happen. But as we look down, let's take a look at number 6 very quickly. Collaborate with others to create new meaning. Research has shown this to be one of the 10 strongest literacy practices that teachers can do in their classrooms.
And so when you're doing those standards, Carol, when you're teaching the reading informational text standards, the literacy practice is what you create for the students. As a teacher, you create an opportunity for them to collaborate with others to create new meaning, whether that's think, pair, share, or a Socratic seminar, whatever it is. You come up with the strategy, the instructional strategy to let the student engage in that practice.
Right.
This is for the students.
Again, this is one of those things that I think is of such value to a classroom teacher, especially when I think about those new to the teaching profession. Where do I start? Well, our standards will give you a guide. The literacy practices, they're not standards, they're practices, and we will give additional training on those and through videos and additional information about those as we go through our series. I do want to point out on page 12 of the document, you can get more information about the strands encoding. And I think about, we're not going in a lot of depth with that, but there is support for anyone who wants more information on page 12 of the standards document. So we are going to jump to view 3. As we told you, there are 3 views in the standards. The first one you just saw was grade level. This one is one you're familiar with too. We're jumping to it because we have a whole video dedicated to view 2 that we will come back to. But when you are looking at this slide, you are seeing the K-12 progressions for literature on one page. And that's one thing we did share during the networks, we called the ELA progressions document. Well, the progressions are still there in the document, but as we look at view 2, you will see that the strength in this is when we are looking at doing vertical alignment, vertical and horizontal alignment, because what you see across the top, this is our first look at, I mentioned the word guiding principles earlier. You are seeing guiding principle 1. Again, I want to remind you, this was formerly called the anchor standard. In other words, this is what we want kids to know and be able to do by the time they leave public school, our public schools. For example, I'm looking at grade 4. This is your part of helping kids get there. These are the skills and the strategies and your part of helping a child reach that ability to determine what the text says explicitly and to make logical inferences from it. Citing textual. You look different though. These say refer to, at 4th grade, refer to details and examples in a text. So you're going to see your standard looks different than the full intent by the time they leave high school. And then again, there are the literacy practices.
So the progression, here's that accountability that I talked about, because when you look at the progression, it shows you, as if I'm the 3rd grade teacher for standard 1, then I can look at that, and that's where my students should be at the end of the year. That's not where they're going to come to me. That's where I need to take them. And then if I'm the fourth grade teacher, I can look at third grade, and this is also laid out in view 2 very nicely for you.
Yes.
But I can look at that and see, okay, this is where they should be. They should be coming to me, able to ask and answer questions and make and support logical inferences to get meaning from a text. They should be able to do that. So now my job is to get them to a place where they can refer to details and examples and explain what the text says explicitly when I'm drawing those inferences from a text. And that, then, the fifth grade teacher knows that's where they're able to pick up. So each grade band has a clear, this is where you're going to start, and this is where your students should wind up. And if everybody everywhere at all levels did that, then we would have 12th graders who are able to do that guiding principle well.
Right. And that is the intent of the progression. This concludes our portion on the progressions view and the grade level view. Our next video will delve into the breakdown view, which is view number 2.